Greetings, folks. Welcome to another one of our Free Friday community classes right here on the Green Art channel on YouTube. This week, I'm excited to be chatting with you about the four elements in modern wortcunning. Now, if you've been around for a while, you know that the four elements and the language, more importantly, of the elements plays a really important role in my own clinical herbal practice. So today I'm going to just walk you through a very brief slice of the history of the four elements. We'll meet a couple of people who have been pivotal in evolving this perspective of living in the cosmos and look at how it landed in herbalism and then made its way into wortcunning. So welcome. If you are new, please take a moment to subscribe. Let me know you're out there. You'll get a little ding every time a new class goes up. I post at least once a week, sometimes more if I have interesting things to share. By the end of this class, my hope is that you will have an understanding of the four elements and how they moved from the ancient world into at least my modern practice of wortcunning. So we'll look at where the elements came from, how they dovetail with modern wortcunning, and we'll just look at how they are in my practice. We are not going to get into all of the deep meaning and nuance of the elements and the energetics. That is for another class. And in fact, I'm going to link some other classes, free ones that you can watch down in the video details below, as well as a larger course if you want to dig into the elements as they express for you as a unique person. So we begin our conversation with my most favorite of philosophers, Empedocles. He was born somewhere in the early part of the 5th century in what is now Sicily. And Empedocles is my favorite for a lot of reasons, but some of them include that he was against the killing of animals in sacrifice for the gods. He taught reincarnation, which I think is cool. And he was the last of the Greek philosophers to record his teachings in verse. And for folks who ever try to put any of the old charms or poems or hymns to memory, you know that when they're in verse, man, it makes it a lot easier and a lot more enjoyable. We begin our conversation with Empedocles because he is, as far as we know, the first person in the Western world, at least, who proposed the cosmogony of what he called the roots. And he had this idea and this sort of mystical experience that the entirety of the cosmos was made up of the four cosmic roots of earth, air, fire, and water. And everything that existed was some combination, some unique combination of all four of those elements. And they combined in unique ways to make everyone, everything, everywhere, right? He also talked about these opposing yet mild, like weirdly dynamic forces that he called love and strife. But in my way of thinking, I call them chaos and cosmos. That the dance of love and strife sort of propelled everything forward and either brought the four elements into harmony or pulled them apart, creating dissolution. So Empedocles, the first time that we really see the four elements talked about in the Western world, he called them the roots because he believed that they existed at the root of all things. He did not call them the elements. And in fact, we didn't really see earth, air, and fire and water called the elements until Plato. Plato was the first person that started to describe them in elemental language, which I think is really interesting. So from him, we have Hippocrates. Of course, we consider him the father of modern Western medicine, although many aspects of modern Western medicine have veered far off the original path of Hippocrates. He was born in Greece in 460 BC, and he, as far as we know, was the first to apply the four roots of Empedocles specifically to medicine. It's not a far stretch, if you think about it, to look at the way Empedocles talked about the roots, the four elements, as being the building blocks of everything, to say, well, when something is falling apart, when something is in a disease state, then it must be the building blocks that are out of harmony. And if those building blocks are the four elements, then we should be looking at the elements, right? And Hippocrates certainly had that foresight. So He came up with the humoral concept that within the body there were four vital fluids, and they were ruled by the elements and made up of their energy, not necessarily seeing the vital fluids as literally earth, literally fire, but that the essence or the energy of fire, the same thing that makes a flame fire, could also make a vital fluid inside of the body fiery. And from here, we get the humoral tradition of ancient Greek medicine, which many people still practice today, or at least in some ways, and certainly influences Western vital herbalism for sure. I don't think that will ever not be the case. I also want to note that Hippocrates also really expounded on this concept of excess and deficiency patterns, probably again because of the way that he understood the four roots of Empedocles, that things inside of the body when we are in a disease state is either because there's too much of something or there's too little of something. So somebody has too much fire energy, causing an eruption of fiery heat, or they're too deficient in water, causing a lack of fluidity and movement, right? A stagnant situation. So he really beautifully dialed all of this stuff in and took this cosmic concept of the four roots and made it more personal in the format of medicine. From him, we skip over a bunch of other really cool people because, again, this is a massive topic and far beyond the scope of this class or me to know every bit of details. But we, of course, have to make a pit stop with Galen. Born in Pergamon in 129 AD, he went to Rome in 162 AD, and his concepts of healing and medicine were definitely not the status quo of Roman healing. He was really into the idea of prognosis, of trying to figure things out, of planning and mapping somebody's pathway away from healing and their pathway back to healing. And this is not the way that medicine was being performed at the time. It felt, radical and kind of flamboyant in a lot of ways. But his effects were so consistently good that he ended up becoming the court physician to Marcus Aurelius and to his brother Lucius Verus. Galen at one point actually left Rome, but was called back to attend the higher ups, right? Because he was so effective. And Galen continues on with this humoral model of elements and looking at things in terms of harmony. How are the elements of the body? How are the functions of the body interacting harmoniously or unharmoniously? Very important. Then we have this epic moment in history, right, where Rome invades Britain. All of our conversation so far has been happening in Greece. And of course, there's all kinds of movement of wisdom between Greece and Rome. In 43 AD, Rome invades Britain. They had, under Emperor Claudius, by the way, they had certainly tried a couple of times before unsuccessfully, but this time it stuck. Emperor Claudius learned a bunch of things from past mistakes of other emperors. He brought the heat in 43 AD. They successfully invaded Britain. And by 87 AD, the entire south of the British Isles, specifically most of England and all of Wales, was being occupied by Rome. And this is important because here's where we see Roman and Greek medical literature, medical thought come into the British Isles. And here in a moment, we are going to dial all of this in as how it relates to wortcunning. But it's important to consider that the four elements are not native to wortcunning thought. They come from the continent. They come from Greece and Rome, and were really polished and refined in those places, and probably influenced by other places further east as well, and the Arabic wisdom as well. And then came into England and Wales second, right? The last person we're going to talk about that kind of wraps this brief story up is Augustine. And Christianity begins with the movement of Rome, right? So Rome starts coming into the British Isles. Eventually, they're bringing Christianity because Christianity settles in Rome before it settles in the British Isles. So Romans have become Christians, so they're bringing Christianity. This really gets serious with the mission of Augustine in 597 AD, and it doesn't take very long, just a few hundred years before pretty much all of the British Isles are predominantly Christian. That's not to say that everyone's not Christian. It's not to say that aspects of pre-Christian animist and pagan thought didn't exist hand in hand with parts of Christianity. It's not the clean sweep that people think it was, but very prevalent, right? So Christians in Britain were there for hundreds of years before Augustine, but with the incoming church comes manuscripts and translations from abroad. These, from Augustine on, these people coming in who were affiliated with the church in Rome had access to these very complex, very refined manuscripts from Greece, from Rome, from Turkey, from Arabia, from maybe even from Egypt, maybe from India, all kinds of different places they would have had access to wisdom from, and the ability to translate it into Latin and then translate it into Old English. So, with the coming of Christianity, and this is why we have to have a slide on this, this is where we really start seeing some of the more pronounced academic information about healing, medicine, herbs, surgery, diet, from the continent make its way into the native lands of Wortcunning, which will be the British Isles. So here we have the melting pot that is Wortcunning. And I know not everybody's going to agree with me on this, that I talk about Wortcunning as being a syncretic melting pot of a lot of cultures, but the way I see it, it looks pretty clear to me. We have a combination of native wisdom, meaning the people that existed in the area that we now call the British Isles before anybody else that we know came in. Then we have that wave of Indo-European settlers who became the Celts. Then we have the Anglo-Saxons, who were also Indo-European people that had came through Germany. Then we have the influx of Romans and Greeks, and with them a lot of Asian wisdom. And then last but not least, the Christian libraries coming in with the monks and scholars. So this is a lot of wisdom landing in a very small place, and landing with people for whom syncretism was very natural, right? Whenever you see animist cultures, you see syncretism. Syncretism meaning that when wisdom and information can be shared respectfully between cultures and it makes sense for the receptive culture, and is given relatively freely or through assimilation by the dominant or incoming culture, then it settles in, right? No one's stealing from one another. No one is coming in and saying everything you say is wrong, only what we say is right. The Romans and Greeks definitely had, a more, let's say, polished format of medicine, but we know that they allowed the Anglo-Saxon wisdom to come into their own practices, and the Celtic, and even the ancient plants of the British Isles that the Romans and Greeks had never encountered before end up finding their way into Latin manuscripts because of all of this sharing, right? So for me, Wortcunning is what happens when all of these people, pretty much pagan up until the Christian influence, are sharing their information about plants, either based on place or perspective. The melting pot of perspectives, practices, approaches, and remedies. So we have to remember that the four elements, as we think of them now, were not part of ancient Wortcunning, right? But now they're a completely dovetailed language symbol that works for many of us. Not everybody who's into Wortcunning, spiritual herbalism, Celtic herbalism, Druidic herbalism, however you want to call it, not everybody's into the elements. In fact, I would say most people are not, because the humoral tradition is probably more popular, but they're there and they exist. And we do see plenty of signs of them in the extant herbals. So there are other syncretized systems that exist. Do what works for you. There is humoral traditions. There's astrological herbalism. There's more sort of reductionist styles. There's, fully based on the herbals and charm styles. This is not the only way. It's one of many bits of information that came in and influenced what has led up to this current moment of Wortcunning where we are evolving the process, you and I together right this minute. So what do the 4 elements look like in my practice? First, I don't use the humors or the temperaments at all. I don't talk about things as being sanguine. I don't talk about black bile, none of that. But I always use the 4 elements as a natural and intuitive language system for exploring disharmony and disease states, especially with new clients. Everybody has an innate connection to the 4 elements. So when we describe a disease pattern as being fiery or frozen or windy, people, without needing to know the nuances of how herbal medicine work, can agree or disagree with that concept, which allows me a quicker assessment, right, and a better path to remedy. So in my practice, I work with the 4 elements as a language symbol, as a way for how I think and how I relate to the plants to meet up with the way that my client is experiencing whatever they're experiencing. The first thing we want to look at is what is out of harmony, right? Going back to Hippocrates, what is there too much of? What is there too little of? And what is just not functioning? And we recently did a class, an advanced class on Helu, the 3 causes of disease in the Old English herbals. And those 3 causes are invasion, loss, and disharmony or disturbance, right? So excess could be considered an invasion, too much of something. Deficiency could be considered a loss, too little of something. And dysregulation, disharmony, disruption, right? Everything is there, but it's not synced up. The timing and the rhythm is off. There's no coherence. So we use these 4 element languages in my practice to figure out where the disharmony is, what's not right, in what direction is it not right? Too much, too little, wonky? Is there too much, too little, or dysregulation, right? This is very important. We'll unpack this a little more in the next slide too. How is the body responding? This is very important in 4 element herbalism because we are using the language of the elements as an assessment tool, right? So it's one thing to talk about a collection of symptoms, a collection of established pathologies that we lump under a name of a particular disease. But what we would rather do is have an individual person unpack their unique experience and meet them where they are. This is what sets herbal medicine apart from allopathic medicine, or one thing at least. And in the next slide, I'm going to break this down for you. We want to know what support and wisdom is needed from the plants. Do we need more of something? Do we need less of something? Do we need a reharmonization of something? It really is that simple, but there are infinite depths and layers of nuance. So energetics in herbalism is very important. Rather than opening up a book and saying, here are 10 herbs that are good for the digestive system. I have a digestive problem. I'm going to take whatever of these 10 herbs I have on hand. That is not good herbalism. That is allopathic reductionist herbalism that is, a crapshoot. It's 50-50 at best chances that you will see some results. When we bring the energetics in and we understand that the personality of the elements which are dominant in specific herbs, just like you and I each have our ruling elements that are more dominant in us. Some of us are more fiery, some of us are more earthy, some of us are more watery, some of us are more airy. The plants as persons also have that. So out of that same list of 10 herbs, we need to know what the predominant energetic flux is. For example, a headache is different from your headache in spiritual herbalism, in wortcunning, in elemental, energetic, temperamental herbalism. A headache is a collection of common symptoms that generally get lumped under the term headache. Your headache is your particular experience of something, and that's what we're most concerned with meeting. It's great to have the word headache as a shortcut, but it doesn't really tell me as an herbalist anything. I cannot approach working on a headache with just that information. If somebody says, what herb do I take for a headache? I can't help you with that. what I can do is help you when you tell me what your headache is. Where is it? How is it? Why is it? When is it? All respiratory herbs, for example, don't have the same unfolding. You could have a group of 10 herbs that have an affinity with the respiratory system. These herbs, when taken into the body, move down into the lungs or up into the sinuses or into the back of the throat, but all of them will unfold uniquely in the body. Those 10 herbs, some of them will move upward and outward. Some of them will move downward and condense. Some of them will go from the lungs to the heart. Some will go from the heart to the lungs. Some of them will come in and mop up excess fluid from the respiratory system. Some will bring in a bunch of extra fluid. Some of them will move and stimulate tissue. Some of them will calm and relax tissue. If you choose the wrong herb, you are choosing an herb that moves directly into respiratory tissue and does something you don't want it to do. So if you have somebody with a very wet, very rattly cough with lots of clear, productive phlegm, and you open the herb book and it says, here's herbs for the lungs, and you happen to have one of them on hand that you give that person, but that herb happens to be an herb with an affinity for the respiratory system that is also very, very damp and watery in nature, you are putting an herb into somebody that will move directly into the part of their body that's struggling and add more dampness to an already overly or excessively damp condition. Maybe in some aspects of the narrative, they'll feel a little bit of relief because the lungs are being addressed, but ultimately you will weigh the condition down and push it deeper into the respiratory system. So this is where allopathic, reductionist, this herb for that condition, herbalism diverges from spiritual, deep, nuanced clinical herbalism, right? Everyone is a mixture of the four roots. You are a mixture of earth, air, fire, and water. You're not just one thing. You will likely have one of them that's dominant, or maybe you have one that's dominant in your body and a different one that's more dominant in your emotions or your mental atmosphere. Which ones are excessive and which ones are deficient? And how can we support harmony? This is always the question, right? When somebody is a really fiery type personality, you already know intuitively what it means when somebody's got a fiery personality. Does it mean that fiery is harmonious for them? Does it mean they have too much or excessive fire? Or does it mean they are deficient in the checking element of fire, which is earth? Not enough earth to surround and ground out the fire element. We will see that in disease patterns, and we will approach it with the right herbs and adjunct therapies to meet that person where they are. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it should make sense. It should be intuitive. Whatever herbs you're working with, whatever elements they carry, somebody should say, this is a really warming, digestive herb. You should say, yeah, that's what I want. That makes sense for this cold, stagnant, turbid, digestive condition I have going on. I want warm, aromatic, moving, diffusing herbs. It should make sense, right? The herbalist certainly should be able to show their work, and the client should also have an intuitive hit that the medicine is in the right direction. So, how to learn if this stuff is interesting to you. First and foremost, the plants are the greatest teachers about their own energetics. You will never find a book that lays out herbal energetics as well as you will learn them from sitting with plants, right? More and more people are doing Western herbals that openly discuss the previously mysterious and sometimes initiatory nature of herbal energetics, but there's no replacement for learning directly from the plants. Learning how to learn from the plants, I think, is the most important thing we can know. There is extant plant lore that oftentimes conceals energetics and directions. We will find plants in mythology and lore and charms and prayers that on the surface, there's no energetics, but when you dig into why the herb is being invoked, what deity they're being invoked with, how the herb is being worked with, what epithets or kennings they're being called, we can see that our herbwise ancestors concealed a deep knowledge of energetics and directions. We have actions, action categories, tastes, directions, and organ affinities, which all can explain elemental expressions. when we have access to that information, sometimes we can glean a little bit about the deeper energetics, the four elements from the herbs. And then we can use that to support or edify our own experience when we sit with the plants and learn directly from them. Personal connections to the plants brings initiations into the elemental language. So um, to me, the four element language or any other herbal language that a person uses in their practice is not something learned, but something received, something downloaded into the heart of hearts from the plants directly. The safe and effective application of specific herbs for specific situations in specific kinds of people is still the foundation of good herbalism. Elemental language provides nuance. We always want to practice in a safe, sane, and consensual way and ensure that the herbs that we're choosing are, in fact, the right herbs for the manifesting pattern, and that the herbs are the right fit for the individual. When you crack that herb book open and there are 10 herbs that are good for the cardiovascular system, not all 10 of those herbs are the right fit for everybody, right? It's all about finding the right herb for the right person. So that's where we're ending today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I am going to put some links to other classes on this subject below. Most of them are free if you want to go down the rabbit hole. If you are interested in this type of conversation and approach to working with our plant allies, come connect with us on Patreon. It's a good time. We do monthly community plant spirit sits, advanced classes, courses, libraries of guided meditations, all kinds of good stuff over there. And make sure to sign up for my monthly newsletter. There's also a link to that down in the details below. I'll send you a little newsletter at the end of every month, just sort of talking about all the cool stuff we did, sharing some insights, ideas, and recipes so we can stay connected. Thanks, everyone. Take care. See you next time.